Well, good evening. It's very good to see so many people here. I'm going to get straight on with it because I've got a lot of slides to get through. Cyberspace is a fifth dimension in everybody's lives. It, alongside the three spatial dimensions and time, it is somewhere else that we live, where we do all the things that we do in ordinary space. We do all of those things more or less in cyberspace as well. And privacy, axiomatically, is important. It's a human right, it's recognized as being important. That creates conflict because there are many organizations that, for various reasons, want to find out things about us and to use that information. And in particular, criminals. The crime will always exist wherever there's money to be made and an opportunity. And for various reasons that we've gone into to a degree in previous lectures, there's money to be made from crime in cyberspace and, unfortunately, much too much opportunity still for doing that. That means that cyberspace has to be policed. But policing inevitably means breaching privacy. I'll come back to these points in a moment. So that creates tensions, and that's what I want to talk about, because I think it's important that we are, as a society, able to have an informed debate about how much privacy is enough but not too much, how much security is enough but not too much. Privacy is a human right. That's simply quoting the Universal Declaration. In the physical world, we've got all kinds of protections. This is evidence that we care about our privacy. We've got doors, we've got obscured glass, we've got locks, we wear clothes, we put up shutters. And technology continues to erode the privacy that exists in the real world, in the three spatial dimensions. Security cameras, automatic number plate recognition take away anonymity. Long lenses, paparazzi, take away distance and the privacy that used to create. And body scanners are increasingly being used to see through clothes, for example. This process isn't going to slow down, and the new quantum technologies are actually being able to do gravitational sensing. And that's advancing at a remarkable rate, and you can't shield gravity. So some of the new quantum technologies are able already to see through walls, and there are technologies also for seeing around corners now using scattered light from lasers. Technology continues to erode privacy. And of course, criminals have things to hide, and the whole thing about policing and about security services is that you need to be able to get hold of the things that criminals want to hide. So you have to breach the privacy of criminals in order to be able to do policing. So there is always going to be this requirement to breach privacy if we want effective policing. Now, a distinction is often drawn in the privacy world between content and metadata. Data about data, metadata. And the analogy that's used is that the address on the front of the envelope is metadata, and what's in the envelope is content. It really blurs in cyberspace. That distinction really blurs. And if you look at those sort of pieces of information, which clinics have you been to? Which churches do you go to? What political meetings do you attend? This is metadata because it can be determined simply by looking at what you're doing physically, for example. This sort of information is essentially metadata, but it can be quite personal. And in cyberspace, it starts to get more intimate because it looks at more detail. If you see a series of websites that people have visited, and at which ones they then went off to another website that takes credit card details, for example, it tells you quite a lot about what they're doing if one of the websites, for example, happens to be an abortion clinic. So it can reveal quite a lot of personal details. And as you can see, if you're doing if you're in corporate finance and you're working on a potential takeover, for example, you need to protect the fact that that is happening because it's commercially sensitive information. And yet tracking what research people are doing on the internet, where they're going, who they're visiting, what they do when they're there, can reveal a huge amount about that sort of activity. So if metadata can reveal deeply personal information, should it or shouldn't it have the same level of protection as is applied routinely to content? There are challenges here that then blow up when you start looking at different things that people are doing and the different ways that they try to protect their privacy, as we'll come on to. Now, 10 years ago, the Royal Academy of Engineering published a report with the same title as this lecture, Dilemmas of Privacy and Surveillance. And they identified a number of different ways of looking at privacy. Confidentiality, anonymity, the ability to do things without people knowing who you are while you're doing it. Freedom to be left alone. Freedom of expression. And control of your personal data. And they also identified a number of societal values that potentially conflict with those, because if you're doing things anonymously, then maybe you're not accountable for your actions and should be. If you're doing things that are criminal, then you should be accountable for your actions, and society regards it as important to have effective policing. Efficiency may get in the way of privacy. It may be important for government databases to be shared across government departments in order to make it very efficient to do things that society has decided government should do. And so it goes on. There are things that you can only do by revealing things about yourself. There are websites that are age protected for good reasons, or services that are necessarily age protected because you shouldn't be entitled to access that service. In order to access it, you've got to give up enough personal information to show that you're entitled to have access to that particular service. So you're revealing personal information. And the age test is going to become really critical if the current digital economy bill goes through in its current form, with the requirement that websites that are handling adult material, legal pornography, for example, have age restrictions on them. There's no indication how on earth you would enforce that, but that's a subject perhaps for a different lecture. So there's a range of conflicting values here. In the 10 years since the Royal Academy report, a lot has changed. Cyberspace has exploded in scale in terms of what we do there and how much of it there is to do it in. And surveillance has increased also exponentially over that period, both government and commercial surveillance. And some people are harmed by that. Some people get benefits from it in terms of better services, whatever. We've all started carrying closed-circuit television cameras around. We've got mobile phones. We've got surveillance devices that, if you've got Siri turned on, are listening to you, and if you've got if your location data is on, are tracking your movements around the place, or in fact, if your phone's on, it's tracking your movements around the place. And Edward Snowden has revealed the extent of the government surveillance that has been going on. So all these things have changed over 10 years. It makes it important to update the Royal Academy report, and to a degree, that's what I'm doing here. So Snowden, what did he reveal and why did he do it? When he was 18, he was a pretty naive youth who didn't have a huge amount of technical expertise. He was online on the arstechnica.com website. His username was the True Hoo-Ha. And he was asking naive questions and also sharing some fairly right-wing political views. And over a number of years, over a period that has been pretty well documented and which I'm not going to talk about now, but you can easily find out about it, go and watch the film, he became a system administrator in NASA, giving him access by right to most of the NASA computers worldwide so that he could provide the technical support that they needed, and of course access to the logs on those computers so that he could monitor for security breaches and of course delete his own logs of security breaches. So he had a lot of access. There were a few tens of thousands of people with his level of security clearance and his level of access. So he was not by any means unique in this. What did he reveal? He found the scale of the surveillance machine that was being constructed shocking. It really violated his morals from the particular political perspective that he had. And so what he revealed were thousands, literally thousands of documents, many of them classified top secret. And he revealed from those documents that thousands of gigabytes of traffic on the internet were being collected from the internet backbone cables, the fibers that carry the bulk of the traffic, and being captured in real time and being filtered and recorded and searched and made available. And most people at the time he revealed it would have said that's just not possible. The volume of traffic is way beyond any technology that would enable you to do that. Turns out it wasn't, and as we'll see, that is the level of surveillance that was going on, and that was what he revealed. He also revealed that a very large amount of customer data was being collected from major internet companies about their customers and their activities online. That internet encryption, which of course is essential for even things like internet shopping, was being systematically weakened by backdoors being put into software, and even by the international standards for encryption being weakened so that people implementing new encryption to the international standards were implementing encryption that was weak enough to be cracked by brute force by the security services. And that there was a lot of interference with devices, mobile phones and computers, for example, being hacked and having backdoors planted into them and so on, and much more than that. The upstream interception were primarily these Blarney, Fairview, Oakstar, Stormbrew programs of activity. PRISM was the downstream collection, the collection from the major internet companies, and he revealed the details of that. Bull Run was the code name for the attack on all the encryption. Egotistical Giraffe was the code name for the attack on Tor, the onion router, and I'll come on to that in a moment. And dozens of other programs that were increasing this surveillance machine. There's an archive of the materials that he released. There's much more detail than I can say today in the transcript, of course, as always, and all the references to the things that I'm saying are there. So if you want to follow any of it up, you'll find the links directly in the transcript. This is the start page for the surveillance archive. This is just all the programs that start with the letter P, which I picked out. It's a page that's got PRISM on it. And it just shows you that you can search by security classification, by the journalist that published it, by the date it was created, by the name of the program. There are lots of ways in which you can search the archive, and there are lots and lots of documents. You click on any of these links, it'll take you to another page with direct links out to the individual documents. This is a top secret slide that is actually the explanation to some of the security analysts of how they should go about finding out the sort of information that they're looking for about a particular target, that they can search upstream on the collection from the fiber cables, or they can go downstream and collect data from the internet companies, and the advice is you should use both. This is, again, the explanation of how the collection of the traffic actually works and why it works. It shows the structure of the internet backbones and where the data is flowing, and why, even if what you're interested in is communication between somebody in China and somebody in Japan, that data may actually well be flowing through the United States. So you may be able to pick it up in the United States, or of course it may be coming via Europe, and GCHQ, one of the partner agencies, may be picking it up for you. That shows, this is again their explanation. I'm using the top secret slides from the NSA to illustrate the talk, because it gives the real impact of the information. These are the cable flows around the world that show the major internet cables, and therefore where you get access to them as they come on shore. And you'll notice there are boats down the bottom there. Some of them could be intercepted under the sea, of course. This is PRISM. This is the explanation of what you can get if you're an analyst needing information about somebody. What information is available to you by using the PRISM sources and going to the various internet companies, to Microsoft, Google, Yahoo, YouTube, Skype, Apple, and many more. And there was a complete link on a complete list on another page. And the sort of things that you can get from them: the emails, instant messages, chats, videos, photographs that have been uploaded, video conferencing, social networking, lots and everything, essentially. And this is the timeline that shows when the individual companies were actually recruited onto the PRISM program. You see it started back in 2007 with Microsoft, and gradually added in other internet companies year by year by year in various ways. $20 million a year being spent on the program to capture and analyze this, and thousands of analysts working on the data, both in the UK, in America, and in other countries around the world, doing the analysis, because of course you've got a huge amount of data here, and therefore if you're going to make best use of it, you need an awful lot of people who are searching against it, doing matching, doing all the kind of data analytics that we've talked about in earlier lectures. Now, because privacy is important, the people who have built the services on the internet and the structure, the backbone, the foundations, the architecture of the internet have built in privacy-enhancing technologies, ways of protecting the privacy of people using internet, moving around in cyberspace. And there are two basic things that you need to protect. The first is you want to protect the content. So encryption is the basic technology there. And we all use encryption. Whenever we go onto a website that starts with an HTTPS, then we're using encryption. It's automatically being applied. Google Mail is automatically applying it. Lots and lots of websites are now automatically encrypting data. Many more of them, incidentally, since the Snowden revelations came out, which is one of the dilemmas that this has created. So encryption is one thing that, if you're in the business of surveillance, you need to be able to break. And that's why there are programs to undermine encryption, because it's a basic privacy technology. The other thing that you need to be able to hide if you're really worried about your own privacy is what you're doing on the internet, who you're communicating with, what websites you're visiting, what your network of contacts is and what their network of contacts is. And there is this onion router, Tor, the onion router, which I'll describe in just a moment, which anonymizes people's access to different websites around the internet. And it's used by commercial organizations. You've got people going overseas who may be in a country where their affiliation to their particular business or government department may actually put their lives at risk if it was known in that country that that was who they worked for. And so they use Tor in order to be able to communicate back in an anonymous way. There are political activists in repressive regimes who need access to news or need to be able to communicate without their governments knowing what they're doing. And of course, many of those activist groups are in fact supported by Western governments who don't agree with what the repressive regimes are doing. And so Tor is in fact being funded extensively by the American government because it's seen as an important facility. And many governments and many international organizations have lent their support to Tor and seen the importance of it to particular groups of people. But of course, it can also be used to conceal illegal criminal activities. And it is the basic service for the dark web. Tor doesn't just anonymize the links, it also gives you the ability to set up websites that you won't be able to find through a search engine. And yet you can then send somebody the details of how to reach it, and through Tor you can then access it. So it's an interesting bit of technology, very important for some people, obviously going to be a problem for law enforcement and security services. So what do the services respond? I mean, they, as far as encryption is concerned, they set about systematically undermining and finding ways of breaking encryption through backdoors and so on. This is a GCHQ slide explaining to GCHQ staff what NSA had achieved. And according to the Snowden archives, there was widespread shock at just how much had been achieved. Even the security analysts simply didn't appreciate that this was feasible, that this degree of analysis was now feasible. This was the program that was doing various things to ensure that encryption wasn't a barrier to security and law enforcement. And as they say, it includes a lot of different methods which are extremely sensitive, and that's why, in general, very, very few people had heard the details of them. They were all codenamed, they were given above top secret classification, need to know access, all the things that you would expect for something of this sensitivity. The Snowden archive contains lots of overview material that explains all this. I mean, this is a 40-slide, this is the opening slide of a 40-slide presentation to a signals intelligence conference about the future, about what we can do now and what we're planning to do in the future. And all 40 slides are available at that link on the internet. This was the user guide for what you do if what you want to do is to penetrate people's Skype calls, encrypted Skype calls. And this explains the underlying problem that Snowden has created, that being able to do cryptanalysis is one of the most sensitive things in terms of national security and the high classifications and protection of information, because it's very hard to acquire these capabilities. It takes a long time to develop them. You almost certainly end up with compromised sources. The NSA's relationships with big internet companies caused internet companies a lot of embarrassment and loss of customer faith and a lot of difficulties, which is why they started introducing widespread encryption and saying that they weren't going to do anything with the security services if they could avoid it, and so on. And the mere fact that you can break encryption is enough to cause people to go somewhere else and to use a different method for communicating. So, if a criminal knows that it's not, that the law enforcement can intercept instant messaging, then they won't use instant messaging. They'll use messaging buried inside some computer game, for example, and use that as their means of communication. So just revealing the details of what can be done is actually enough to cause an awful lot of difficulties. So Snowden really, really damaged national security in a lot of countries by what he revealed. This is Tor. This is the Onion router. The left-hand screen there shows what happens is you download the Tor browser onto your computer. It's trivially easy to do. It's a simple download, doesn't require installation of anything. You can download it onto a USB stick and run it straight off the USB stick. It's a Firefox browser with particular capabilities. What it does is to go off to the Tor database and get a list of active Tor nodes, which the Tor infrastructure keeps up to date. It then selects a random route to where you want to get through those individual Tor nodes. And then, as you can see on the second screen, it sets up a series, the green links are encrypted. So it sets up a set of encrypted links hopping from one Tor node to another before finally the red link emerging out onto the open internet to access the particular website that you want to get to. And the consequence of that is next website that you want to get to, or even another website linked to from this one, you'll select a completely different route. So it becomes very, very difficult to trace back who it is who's accessing a particular website, because all these encrypted links are there. They're only there very briefly. They take completely random routes through the network before suddenly popping out into the clear and starting to do things. Very difficult for the security services. And that's what the NSA thinks about Tor. That's, again, one of their slides. They can de-anonymize a very small fraction of Tor users, and it's this program, Egotistical Giraffe, that was the program that they had developed to de-anonymize the links on Tor. Of course, they had to try to do it. Otherwise, there was a lot of their work that simply was going to be defeated by people using Tor. If you want to follow up the details of this, then the Snowden Archive, look up Egotistical Giraffe, follow the links, find out what has been revealed about it. Why would anybody sacrifice what Snowden sacrificed? A salary of about $200,000 a year, house in Hawaii, living with a girlfriend, family that he was on good terms with and which he met regularly. He gave the whole lot of that up. He knew that was what he was doing, that he was making himself a pariah and probably a target for assassination, certainly a target for extradition and lifelong imprisonment. And he did it for essentially political reasons. He thought that the surveillance machine that had been built by the American government was spying so much on American citizens that he felt that it was unconstitutional, it gave too much power to the government, it was against his political instincts that the government should have that sort of power, and so he decided that the right thing to do was to tell the world about what was going on in order to try to bring it back into balance. In a sense, he felt that the pendulum had swung too far in one direction and he wanted to give it a hard shove back towards the centre, and of course what he's done is to push it a hard shove back beyond the centre, if we can determine where the centre is. So we've got conflicting requirements. There are lots of reasons why, legitimate reasons, why we need to be able to do things confidentially, secretly. we want secure systems, because if they're not secure, criminals will exploit the insecurities, and cybercrime's bad enough anyway. If we have weak encryption, the criminals can use the weakness in the encryption to commit more crime. But if the encryption is really strong, then the law enforcement agencies can't break the encryption to catch the criminals who are using the encryption to hide their criminal activities. There is a tension there which you cannot wish away. And it raises this question: how much security is enough, but not too much? How much privacy is enough, but not too much? And different countries reacted differently. And I just want to contrast what the USA and the UK have done. I'm speaking in the UK, so I think it's important to talk about what has actually happened in the UK, because, you know, apart from anything else, it's background to some lawsuits that will undoubtedly erupt in the fairly near future, and also to the Digital Economy Bill, which is currently before Parliament, and which, of course, is overlaid on the Investigatory Powers Bill, which I'll speak about in a moment. The USA, there was a storm particularly about the interception of phone calls, and it was the issue of mass surveillance, the fact that it wasn't just people who were on the target list whose data was being intercepted, but to a first approximation, everybody. And only after the event, you know, they would then do pattern matching and searching and look for behaviours that would then enable the agencies to focus on the people that they really wanted to look at. And that was felt to be the wrong way around and unconstitutional. And so executive orders were issued, famous executive order, and laws were introduced, and guidance and rules were introduced in America to reduce the right of the powers of the security services to carry out interception at that sort of level. And it has, I'm told, constrained the activities. How much, of course, is secret, so we don't know. But it has limited what they have the power to do, and the courts will intervene in ways now that perhaps they wouldn't have done before. What the UK did was to look very hard at what had been revealed and about the UK laws, and to spot that there were a number of grey areas where it wasn't entirely clear that what was happening was entirely legal in the UK, because the laws weren't 100% specific about what was legal, for very good reasons that, you know, the lawmakers, apart from anything else, didn't know what was being done, and because inevitably, as you need to, if you're a security service, you keep pushing the boundaries of legality and reinterpreting the laws in the way that enables you to get your job done. So what the UK did was to basically pass laws that legitimised all the things that were happening. And they had to do that in quite a hurry, so a couple of laws were passed, and were passed with sunset clauses, that because it was the only way to get them through the House of Parliament quickly, to say that they would expire at the end of last year. And so before the sunset clauses at the end of last year, they had to get a new Investigatory Powers Act through Parliament, a bill through Parliament, and make it into an act. And that's where the Investigatory Powers Act came from. Known colloquially in the popular press as the Snoopers Charter. Amber Rudd, our Home Secretary, as you can see, describes it as, in a way, rather differently from the way that the Policy Director of Liberty describes it. This is an illustration of the dilemmas that I'm talking about. It depends what lens you look at these laws through as to whether you feel that they are oppressive, draconian, completely over the top, or whether you believe that they are the necessary laws to enable a secure society to operate, and for proper policing to be done in the cyberspace that is an important dimension of our lives. And I'm not here to tell you what the answer to that is. That's a decision for all of us collectively. But it is important to recognise that these are real dilemmas, and there are no easy answers to them. Now, the Investigatory Powers Act is big and complex. 227 pages and 64 plus 64 schedules. It takes a lot of reading. Some of the key things that it does is it compels internet service providers to keep internet connection records, which are not wonderfully well defined as to exactly what they are, but a sort of rule of thumb is that it is a record of your web browsing at the top domain level, not the individual pages, but the websites that you've visited. And they have to be retained for 12 months. So there is a history of all your web activity over a 12-month period. And of course, it'll all be time-stamped and ordered, so you'll be able to see the order in which people have accessed different sites. And of course, when you go onto a website, that website contains lots of advertisements and links to other sites, many of which are automatically activated. So you get quite a mesh of information about different websites that actually, if you do the analysis, can give you a certain amount of information about which pages you're on. But leave that issue aside for a moment. It legitimizes interference with computer systems, hacking into them, modifying them, and in fact, with the appropriate warrants, it legitimizes doing that in bulk, so that you can do it to a whole class of computers or a whole class of phones with the appropriate warrants, and particular computer products, software products, and modify those, and so on. And public authorities are able, with the appropriate authorization, much of which can be done for particular purposes internally to those authorities, they are able to obtain the data that has been obtained through these routes and the internet connection records that have been collected by the ISPs. What public authorities? Well, you'd expect, I guess, the police and the security agencies, GCHQ, Department of Health, Home Office, Department of Transport, Tax, of course, Department of Work and Pensions, Ambulance Trusts, Criminal Case Review Commission, Competition and Markets Authority, Financial Conduct Authority, Food Standards Agency, Health and Safety Executive, Serious Fraud Office, and of course all the equivalent authorities in the devolved administrations. What grounds? These are the purposes: security, preventing or detecting crime, preventing disorder, economic well-being of the UK, so far as those also relevant to the interests of national security, but in fact, if you trace through, you find national security is defined in terms of one of its classes, the economic interests of the UK. So that's not a limitation really on that, in my opinion. I'm not a lawyer, but in my opinion. Public safety, you might think, is a fairly broad category. Protecting public health, collecting any tax, duty, levy, or other imposition, contribution, or charge payable to a government department. Preventing death or injury, mitigating any injury, investigating miscarriages of justice. The next one's really pretty obscure. It's about trying to find out who somebody is if they're not in a position to tell you. And exercising functions relating to the regulation of financial services and markets or financial stability. So it's a pretty broad set of categories. Now, the previous legislation that I mentioned had sunset clauses, was subject to a legal challenge on the basis that it was much too broad. It allowed essentially mass surveillance, and that was felt to be contrary to human rights. And a member of Parliament and a number of the privacy NGOs got together and brought a case before the UK courts, which ruled that indeed it was contrary to our international obligations under European law because of the European Human Rights Convention. And the government appealed it, and it went to the top court in Europe, the top court of the European Union, which made this ruling. But basically, they rejected the appeal, and in doing so said that it's not permissible to have mass retention of personal data, that access to personal data must be authorised independently. It can't be done just by somebody in a government department that wants access to it. That it's got to be targeted, that only people who are already suspected of serious crimes can have their data accessed, and that people must be told if their data is accessed. And there are certain constraints on that, obviously, to make it completely practicable, but nevertheless, this is the essence of the ruling, taken out from some overviews that have been published. That's going to be a problem for us, because it's fairly clear, it's certainly being strongly argued, that the new IP Act falls foul of these rulings. This is a ruling that actually suspended these activities under the previous law, but gave them a stay of execution. It basically said, these things are illegal, but you can carry on doing it through to March 2017, because we've got to give you time to become compliant. And during that period, the new law came in. So now that ruling doesn't immediately apply to the new law. It will take another court case. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so this is my take on it. It will take another court case to establish that these principles also apply to that act. But it's fairly clear, I think, that the court would come up with the same ruling. And according to the press, the government is trying to get allies from other European states to see if the European law can be changed in order to allow these things to be made legal, because of the dilemmas that this lecture has been all about. In order to get the balance right between privacy and national security, the government believes that the IP Act does that. Certainly the privacy activists don't believe that the IP Act is proportionate, and that will be fought out in the courts. Now, these are not technical issues, these are societal issues. These are things that you and I decide about when we go to the polls, when we vote, when we lobby our MPs, when we write to the newspapers, when we have an influence that sets the rules in the society that we live in. So individuals' attitudes to privacy are actually at some level at the heart of the framework that society builds up in order to try to codify how people believe they want to live, what sort of society they want to live in, what sort of society they want their children to live in. And one of the dilemmas we face is that attitudes to privacy differ. You know, lots of people were buying these devices at Christmas. The Amazon device that contains the Alexa, or connects to the Alexa service, that sits in your kitchen or wherever you put it, listening to every word that you say. Lots of microphones, good quality, capable of picking a conversation out of a lot of background noise. What's it doing with that data? Well, it's recording it and passing it for analysis, because if it detects one of the keywords, then it is going to create a query and send it off to a server to actually have the query answered. Or it's going to undertake some action on your behalf, because that's what it's for. But it's sitting there listening to everything that's going on. And the data collected from this device has already been subpoenaed by an American court in a murder inquiry, because it's believed that the murder actually took place and that the device listened to it happening. And because it actually has to be listening before the keyword is recognised, obviously, otherwise it couldn't hear the keyword. It obviously has to record and analyse some of the conversation before it knows that you're asking it to do something. And so actually, apparently, some data has been recovered from inside the particular device in this particular murder scene that was considered to be pertinent to that murder. So they didn't even have to get that from the remote servers. It was still in the machine, but clearly there was further data, and I believe the attempt to recover the data that was sent off to the remote servers is continuing. Google Home is a similar device doing the same sort of thing for you, listening to what's going on and undertaking some level of analysis. And there are lots of voice-activated toys around and other devices, but the toys are particularly interesting. This is the Kayla doll, and it responds to a child talking to it and voice commands. But it's a doll. It runs on a battery. It can't conceivably have the processing power to do any kind of sophisticated voice recognition within that doll. The battery would run down very quickly. What it's doing is connecting into home Wi-Fi, sending a stream of data from a doll to a remote server, where the remote server is analysing it, and then sending back responses. And in fact, I don't know if it was that doll, but some of these toys have been hacked, and people have been getting them to say obscene things to children in their bedrooms. And you laugh, but it's not really funny. And children tell their dolls an awful lot of very private things about what's going on in their families. And it's not clear that you necessarily want arbitrary people in anywhere, listening into the chatter that's going on in a child's bedroom. And it's not clear what you would expect them to do if they heard some of the things that they might hear. There are some real issues about this, but people buy these devices. Their attitudes to privacy are different from mine, clearly, because I find it astonishing, and yet they go out and spend hard-earned money on it. So the dilemmas haven't been resolved. The battles are going to continue. The privacy activists are going to carry on using the courts to maintain the right to privacy. Most of us will continue to give our personal data away to anybody who offers us a discount voucher. Depressing though that statement is. And meanwhile, the geeks who, for good reason, believe that it's their internet. We built it, we gave it to you. Stop messing about with it. We built this thing to actually provide a service to humanity. We didn't expect it to be turned against us as a surveillance engine, for example. Not quoting anybody in particular. They're fighting back. So they're hardening the encryption. They're putting more encryption into more of the protocols. They're designing new internet protocols that are more secure, less available to be surveilled than the current ones. So there's a technical battle going on between the spooks and the geeks. And both of them have got enormous technical firepower. The spooks have got remarkable financial resources, but there are an awful lot of extremely clever geeks working together on open source software and some of the web projects trying to improve privacy. So where that battle will end up, nobody knows. It's an arms race. As something gets weakened, other things get strengthened, and so on. And as I said, this is a political issue. The right answer, who should win, is not a technical question. It's a political question. It's a question for you. And how do we reach an informed consensus about that? I think only by discussing it, the sort of way that we may be able to this evening if I shut up soon enough. These are not new dilemmas. It's worth pointing out. This is a a much misquoted quote from Benjamin Franklin. If you go looking for this on the internet, you'll almost certainly find it misquoted, because there is a version of it which is completely ungrammatical, which he would never have been, which is widely spread across the internet and quoted in all sorts of contexts. That's the real one. That's a photograph of what it says on the title page of his book. That's what he meant, and that's what he said. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. It's a nice line. The problem is, what is an essential liberty? And so you're just back to the dilemmas. So that's the question. Thank you for listening. I look forward to hearing whether you've got any answers.